Hi, I'm Rod Solar from Livesey Solar Practice Builders, and today I'm here to talk to you about presbyopia, the market for presbyopic correction, specifically how you can win from the biggest refractive surgery market in the world. I previously gave this talk in Lisbon at the ESCRS 2017 back in September, and got really good responses. People felt it was very informative, and yeah, definitely something that they can take away from to look at expanding their practice and offering more, well, it's just a greater portfolio of services in order to enlarge their market. So the talk will be very similar to what I gave in Lisbon. So if you were there, this would be a great review. If you were not there, then this is a great opportunity to take advantage of watching the whole segment, which I believe is going to be about an hour long. So yeah, we'll attempt to transcribe this as well, so that you can follow along down below if you don't care to see the video. But I hope you do stick with me. It's a very interesting talk, and I think it will help you rethink perhaps how you market your business in laser refractive surgery. So let's begin. So first, just a little introduction to us. We're Livesey Solar. Obviously, if you're on this website, you probably know a little bit about who we are. But just very, very briefly, we've been healthcare marketing specialists focusing on growing refractive healthcare businesses for quite a while. We got our start back in 1997 and have been working in the field since that time. Now we've worked with lots and lots of different clinics, hospital groups, and independent surgeons working out of different facilities. Our expertise ranges in the UK, all over Europe, Canada, the US, and also UAE, and various other countries in the Middle East as well. So we've got a really good proposition for our clients, where essentially what we do is we assess their business, and if it's likely to do so, we'll offer them an opportunity to grow their business within 3 months. And that can be extremely beneficial, especially since many businesses are plateauing. Laser refractive businesses, once they've grown to a certain level, they more or less stay flat for quite a bit of time. There are some macro reasons for that, which I'll get into today in this talk. But also there are some ways of getting out of that rut. Some of which we'll also talk about in this talk as well. Here's a brief overview of our client list. These are clients that we have worked for in the past and also currently work for. I just want to bring your attention to, first of all, the vast majority of these clients are in ophthalmology. We also do some work in plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, dental surgery. Essentially, the binding thread, if you will, that connects all of these together is that they're offering elective surgical procedures at high investment prices. So we work with all sorts of pricing in the marketplace. However, the companies that tend to do best with us are those that offer more premium or sub-premium pricing. And the reason for that is essentially because they have a great interest in competing against low-price providers, and usually they can use our services in order to help them compete, help them sell better, and help them get more people to choose them instead of their low-price competitors. I wanted to bring your attention, first of all, to one of the companies here at the top left-hand corner of the video, which is Zeiss. Zeiss has asked us to become their professional development consultant for their for their customers in Europe, and so we're working with them on certain pilot projects in order to build practices and clinics that own and operate a Zeiss laser, specifically in the area of presbyont. So it goes without saying that because they're a client of ours, some of the things that I will talk about today well, they're very similar to the kinds of things that Zeiss markets. So I wanted to bring to light that potential conflict, just in terms of the advice that I give. However, you can use the advice that I provide in this talk with any surgical procedure associated with the presbyopic community, Gen Xers, baby boomers, and beyond. It doesn't have to be Zeiss products, but that is an area that we're working in and know a lot about. I also want to bring your attention to Optigra, and that I wanted to say we got a lot of experience with Optigra working with their call center and increasing their conversion rates from roughly about 24% upwards to about 50%. And which is effectively, as you can imagine, without doing a lot of math, doubles the business. So we're very, very happy with our multi-year association with Optigra and the kind of results that we achieve there. But the reason I bring them to the fore at this moment is because their market is mainly composed of folks who are presbyopic. Optigra focuses on through their clinics in the UK, offering and marketing a service called Claraview. And Claraview is their brand name for what is effectively a refractive lens exchange procedure. I don't need to tell you all about what that is, but essentially their primary market are folks with reading glasses, varifocals and bifocals, and those who've perhaps tried monovision contact lenses and monovision LASIK. So the upshot of that is that I had an opportunity to listen to recorded calls from thousands of customers and inquiries who had these problems, and I heard a lot of their descriptions and how they talk about their problems. So I learned a lot of information about how they conceive and perceive their problem, and it's quite different from the typical problem that you might be more familiar with, which is your basic myopia, hyperopia, and astigmatism that you get from patients seeking laser refractive surgery, those who are 45 and under. So a great deal of difference and variety that we experienced there, especially for people who were looking at getting their vision corrected for their presbyopia, and also considering a lens-based procedure where a surgeon would go into their eye, remove the existing lens, and replace it with an artificial lens. That, as you can imagine, is a slightly different conversation than what is the kind of conversation that might be had with somebody seeking laser eye surgery, which is generally considered safe and quite effective, and whose risk profile is considerably smaller. We're not talking about patients here who are interested in cataract surgery who have the choice of either have an intraocular lens procedure or go blind, or substantially lose their vision until at such point they can't operate. We're talking about people who have a choice. And this is an entirely elective procedure for presbyopes, and they have a solution that's relatively cheap in many cases and easy to acquire. So we're talking about a really different kind of mindset, and that's where I've got a lot of experience in understanding how to convert these individuals. So I bring a lot of that experience forward to help my clients today when dealing with all types of presbyopic patients. I also want to bring your attention to London Vision Clinic, and London Vision Clinic is another client who we've had a relationship with since 2002, and these folks were the pioneers behind the introduction of what they called laser blended vision, and which eventually became Presbeyond. Many people still call it laser blended vision. Working with Zeiss, they developed the procedure, a laser refractive procedure that accomplished an ability to blend the distances, so to create a blend zone between the near vision and the distance vision, which has a considerably higher tolerance rate than monovision, and with a tremendous adoption rate here in London for London Vision Clinic. Now at least half of their patients are adopting laser blended vision for their choice. So it's a procedure that's been around for quite some time. It's had a lot of testing, and it's now being rolled out throughout Europe, and looking into rolling it out in Asia as well. Certainly it's pending approvals in the US. So we're looking at an enormous market opening up, and we believe that this, in fact, could be the future of laser refractive surgery. That may sound like a bit of a bold statement, especially considering that these days most of the people that you're talking to, if you are a laser eye surgeon, are millennials. And now you're being bombarded with messages from consultants telling you how to market to millennials. And I'm not going to say that that's a bad idea. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think you absolutely need to understand how to market to millennials better. But at the same time, we need to consider not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and also consider the fact that all the learning that we've developed over the years of talking to baby boomers and Gen Xers, well, we've got to just slightly modify that, but still include that in our patient mix if we want to grow dramatically beyond the millennial population, which has its inherent issues. And the issues that I'm going to get into today involve two main things. Number one is number in terms of population, and number two is discretionary income. Both of those issues I'll get into specifically around Europe, but the kinds of issues I'm talking about here in Europe are in fact only worse in the United States and Canada, especially when it comes to discretionary income, and perhaps potentially less intense in Asia. But these are areas where we still have to look into, still have to study. But we certainly know that if, as a laser refractive surgeon, you're intending on basing your entire future on a market that is smaller than the Gen Xers and baby boomers combined, and also has much less money in terms of discretionary income, you might have a tough go at it in terms of growing. And many practices that I've spoken to have experienced exactly this. They've noticed that laser eye surgery has never quite recovered from the boom years of the mid-2000s. While it's generally expected that a business would grow and grow and grow over time as more patients get out there and more people talk about it and adoption increases and more friends and family come to your clinic, what we're seeing instead is we're seeing a flat line in adoption of the procedure. So that's industry-wide. Of course, there are some bright spots where certain clinics will break that mold, and we help them to do that. However, the vast majority of clinics out there are finding that they just can't seem to grow those procedure numbers year by year. And I am one of the few people in the industry, advising the industry, who has pointed out that perhaps there's an issue with the millennial marketplace in the sense that perhaps they can't really afford what we're offering. Anyway, I'm sure that opinion will be more common in the future as people begin to see the stats. But anyway, we'll get into the details of that as we go. This is our footprint with regards to where our clients are located. As you can see, we've got quite a wide degree of experience, quite a wide range of experience across Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. And the majority of our experience is in locations around the United Kingdom, where we have focused mainly over the last 20 years. So let's get into the talk itself. So what is this talk about? Well, as I've already talked about, why the presbyopic market is too big and too rich for laser refractive surgeons to ignore. And I'll get into the very specific reasons for that. And how laser eye surgery markets differ from each other, how they differ with regards to the channels where they get their information and therefore their advertising, how they differ to the marketing message that they respond to, how they differ with the kind of interactions that they want to have with doctors, how they differ with the way that they approach large investments and payments, who pays, who decides, and how they differ with regards to who they involve in the decision-making process. So there's lots to discuss in terms of how they differ. It goes well beyond millennials prefer text messages and baby boomers prefer email. This is true, but it goes well beyond those simplistic differences that you've probably heard of so far. And we'll get into some of those as we go. How marketing approaches must vary to attract different patients is also a subject of this talk, and we'll get into a specific breakdown of the types of tactics that work for not only millennials, of which we're hearing so much about, but also Gen Xers and baby boomers, and also traditionalists, and how many of you are going to have to start leaving behind some of the tried and tested and quite frankly dying approaches to marketing that was the traditional fare, and replace it, depending on who your market is, with either the kinds of channels and media that baby boomers and Gen Xers enjoy, or the kinds of channels that millennials tend to live in. So it's up to you in terms of which market you go for. My advice is to go for a broader mix and to expand your business by offering different products for different groups. But what that invites is this whole discussion that is, I think, quite new to laser refractive surgery, which is the concept of market segmentation and also differentiating one's approach with one's tactics to appeal to those different segments of the market. But I'll get into that as we go. So let's first talk about the presbyopic opportunity. Many of you will know this information because you've been dealing with presbyopes for a very long time, but perhaps it's useful to try to compare it with in regards to laser eye surgery terms. Let's talk about the size first of all. So the estimates of this population range between 1.3 to 1.8 billion people worldwide. As you can imagine, that's an enormous number. Of course, not all of those people can afford laser eye surgery. That's not what we're talking about. But we are talking about a tremendous number of potential patients that could, just the ones who can afford it, could turn this whole thing around. It could be a sea change with regards to how we look at the typical and the average laser eye surgery patient. If we only have the ability to reach them and to offer them something that works. And I believe now we have both. So this is the big group we're talking about here. From the European perspective, which is what we know best, 2 out of every 5 Europeans today are already presbyopic. I consider myself among those folks. I started wearing glasses about 1.5 years ago for my close-up vision. And I believe that this might have an impact in terms of why I've become very interested in this space. Of course, I've worked with lots of clinics who have focused on presbyopes and serving them as a primary target market, but there's nothing quite like having the problem yourself. I've never worn glasses before. This is the first time I've ever needed these. I have about 4 pairs, a couple of plus ones, a couple of plus 1.5s for the nighttime reading. And also, whenever I need to kind of look at something that's more small, like reading a novel, for example. And I'm finding them tolerable. However, there are moments when I feel very much like I would rather not have them, and I'm not alone. In fact, my Generation X friends who are older than I am, and those who are baby boomers, I've already seen them complaining on Facebook and elsewhere. That's where, by the way, Gen Xers and boomers hang out, talking about their surprise that they now need reading glasses, and that's the nice term for them. And the reason, I don't know why they're surprised. I mean, I've known for many, many years that this was coming, I suppose probably because I'm in the industry, but for many of them it's a total shock. And it is also one of the first signs, especially among those of us who are healthy and active, that we're aging, that we are getting older, and that time applies to us. We feel like we're in our 30s, most of us. Those of us who exercise, those of us who eat well, those of us who get out and have active relationships. We feel like we're in our 30s. They keep saying 40s is the new 30s, 50s is the new 40s. However, there is a biological change that takes place that despite all our psychological adaptations, we just simply can't get around, at least not yet. So this is a huge surprise to many and a big shock to some. Let's talk a little bit about the different demographics now, just to get a level set on the types of folks that we're talking about and who they are, just so that we're really clear on the generations that we're talking about. So first of all, The four generations that we hear most about, there are in fact five. There's another one coming up just behind millennials, which we won't talk about at the moment, simply because they're nowhere near the age at which time they become consumers, and specifically laser eye surgery patients. So let's talk a little bit about the different types. So we have millennials, of which many of you know. Generation Y is also another word for millennials. That's Y, by the way, not the question why. Generation X, and the reason they called it Generation Y is because it follows X. Generation X was a term developed by one of my, I don't know him, but he was one of the folks that I actually grew up with. His name was Douglas Copeland, who wrote a book called Generation X and termed the word and coined the phrase. His biggest claim to fame, really, he was a Vancouver novelist. And wrote a book called Generation X, and the idea is he couldn't identify where this generation stood. Who were these people who came after the baby boomers? And that's where they got their name. Baby boomers, of course, come from the idea of the boom that followed the tremendous birth rate that occurred after World War II. And these folks born after 1945 all make up that group. They were the largest boom of babies to be born at any one time, and this had a lot to do with soldiers returning from the Second World War and deciding, okay, life is short, let's make babies. And there we go. And the many Generation Xers, some of them are children of the early baby boomers. For example, my parents are baby boomers. And millennials are children of the youngest baby boomers, and in some cases also older Generation Xers. We also have some Generation Xers who are children of traditionalists as well. Families were much larger in the past, and women gave birth for a longer period of time because they didn't go and get into their careers of their own so much. So traditionalists are the folks who were born prior to 1945, prior to the war, and we see the war as a big turning point for many, many reasons I won't get into. This isn't a history lesson, although I do give a course on identifying and marketing to the four generations, which I encourage you to look at if you're interested. The years of birth, just for reference, millennials in 1980 to 2000, and just before I get too far into the dates of birth here, there's disagreement among demographers. It's just how it works. And also there's good reason for that, because millennials might be slightly at a different starting point in terms of the commonalities that they share, depending on where they grew up. History doesn't happen at exactly the same pace in every place. And different countries will have different generational starts and stops, and simply because different countries are at different levels of development, different levels of technology adoption. But generally speaking, millennials are born between 1980 and 2000. Generation Xers were born between 1965 and 1979. I'm in that generation, and I was born in 1971. Baby boomers were born in 1946 to 1964, so these were the hippies. These were the folks who grew up in the 70s and in the 60s, and were the first sort of generation that really set the tone for the rest of us as what's the word? Homo consumerist, if you like, as opposed to Homo sapiens. So off they went, and we followed in large part in their footsteps. However, millennials aren't quite following in exactly the same footsteps. Traditionalists were born 1945 and before, and these are folks who experienced, I would suggest, the most change. There has never been a time in history where change has been more rapid and more extreme than what the traditionalists have experienced over the last 80 years. So there we have it. Those are the generations, and they're very different. There are folks who are millennials, especially on the cusp, who act more like Generation Xers. There's folks who are Generation X who act more like Millennials, and so on and so forth. Again, these are not hard, solid lines. They are more lines that are characterized as shades of gray, if you like. The age in 2017, at which time I'm giving this talk, this is a handy reference for you if it's a little easier to think about them this way. They're 17-year-olds to 37-year-olds for Millennials. Now, as you can imagine, there's a significant difference between a 17-year-old and a 37-year-old in most normal cases. And that's why we can't necessarily look at all Millennials as all the same, just like we can't look at Generation Xers as all the same. And I would say Millennials, there's probably even more differentiation because we all know that between 17 and 37, we do quite a bit of growing up, and quite a bit of life decisions are made during that phase. Whereas between 38 and 52, there's perhaps a little less variability, but there's still variability. Baby boomers 53 to 71 at the moment, and then traditionally 72 and older. So that's just for reference. The EU population of the 28 countries that currently compose the EU. We've done the math here, and we've identified that Millennials are roughly 132 million in number. Generation X are 110, so they're the smaller group. And baby boomers are 122. There obviously were more baby boomers, but baby boomers being 53 and 71 have a higher chance of dying than Millennials do, so you are seeing their numbers decline. And traditionalists are 68 million, closer to 69 when you round it up. Now, one immediately would look at this and would conclude that Millennials are clearly the biggest demographic, and therefore we must target them if we want to have the best chance of succeeding. But I want to alert you to the fact that when you take 110 million and 122 million and add those together, it doesn't take a math genius to figure out that those numbers are considerably higher than the 132 million we have with Millennials. And I'll be getting back to that very key statistic as we go throughout the program. This is another very important statistic. Now, much has been made of the idea that Millennials have fewer opportunities economically than generations that precede them, and that's entirely true. And there are many reasons for this. Millennials have higher debt loads by and large, especially those Millennials who had to pay for education. Now, I know in Europe, in many cases, education is paid for by the state. However, in the UK, we're seeing that introduced paid education many years ago. We're seeing a considerable debt load among Millennials in the UK. We're also, which leads, of course, to intergenerational inequality. We're also seeing in the US considerably more debt load because they've had the system of having to pay for their education, of which is much more expensive as well, for many, many years now. The same thing goes for Canada. So Millennials have a huge debt load, and that doesn't affect their income, of course, but it does affect their discretionary income. And that's the money, the subset of one's income that goes towards discretionary expenses, which include things that have nothing to do with households and and food, the basics of life, but rather the things that one wants to do when one has a little extra money, like laser eye surgery. Okay, so we have this issue here with Millennials who have less income. Their wages have not, wages for people going into the workforce have not increased dramatically over the last 40 years. They remain fairly stagnant. And Millennials also were born at a time, or rather got into the workforce at a time that was probably one of the worst economic downturns in our history. So we have some serious issues surrounding the economic spending power of Millennials. So this is going to play a part, and we have to be conscious of that, especially when considering offering products. Do we either reduce our prices, which is something we don't really want to do we? Or do we look at expanding our markets and pricing somewhat differently so that we can bring our overall average price up and then market something to a Generation X and baby boomers who can afford it. So let's get into Generation X at the moment. We have 27,468 as their average mean income. Again, these are all euros because we're talking about European statistics. That's a significant jump. We're talking about almost 5,000 euros there. And then a little higher up there are baby boomers. So at least in Europe, Generation Xers are doing almost as well as baby boomers. That's not so much the case elsewhere, but certainly here in Europe, we're seeing that similarity. And that there might be a correlation between the amount of social state involvement in the sense that we don't have to pay for a lot of things and didn't have to pay for a lot of things that the state covers. One of those things being primary health care across Europe is pretty much socialized medicine. So that reduces the amount of expenses we have to make to spend, but it doesn't affect our income. One of the big issues around Generation X, especially in the and millennials in the US and Canada, is that they got into the workforce en masse, because what we're talking about here, they're the children of baby boomers. So what they did is they created an overabundance of supply of labor, which ended up encouraging companies to hire them at lower and lower rates. And this is one reason why wages haven't kept up with inflation. So we have some serious intergenerational inequality issues that we can't unfortunately wait to address for governments to address. We have to adapt to these changes. Of course, your vote is your own, but I think I'd know what I'd be thinking about in terms of what works for all of us is to get more equality among these generations as opposed to less. Baby boomers, they were among the richest in history. And not only are they making higher amounts of mean income, they're also probably the ones who have the most wealth. So they don't need to just go to what they're getting paid for on a regular basis to find their discretionary income. They have something called savings, which is really quite a foreign concept to those of us who are younger. Savings isn't something that many millennials have to speak of. Traditionalists as well are there's this myth that the old and gray are poor and destitute. This is an outdated myth that is not borne by the statistics. As you can see, traditionalists are earning, in fact, the most. And one of the major reasons for this is the fact that pensions just simply have not eroded. Pensions have been very well protected. One of the things we know about voting statistics is that folks over 70 are some of our most active, politically active voters. They're going to go out there and they're going to vote for governments who are going to keep their pensions, their Social Security, their benefits intact. And if we look at government spending, we typically see, especially when it comes to healthcare, we see a tremendous amount of, or much larger fraction of spending being oriented towards the older voter than the younger voter. And the main reason for that is because younger voters, there's fewer of them because they don't vote so much. So that's a lesson for some of you there. But the idea here is that, traditionalists have managed to maintain a lot of their wealth and maintain their mean income. So, they're doing okay. In fact, I read a statistic recently that in Canada, the average traditionalist is 9 times more wealthy than the average millennial. So let that sink in for a moment. Especially next time they say, you hear a traditionalist say to you, back in my day, we could have houses. Well, there's a reason for that, Gramps. So we have a couple of disparities here that either are going to have to be addressed, or we're going to see some serious challenges for certain businesses who focus entirely on millennials, aka all laser eye surgeons today. When it comes to myopia, now this is obviously short-sightedness. When it comes to short-sightedness, we see a generally upward trend as we age. There's no surprise here. The statistics for this, by the way, are down below in the references. This is just this also includes, by the way, data from all over, not just Europe, but also Asia. Hyperopic incidence also grows as one ages. So we've got a bit of complexity surrounding the baby boomers as well, especially for those laser refractive surgeons who currently don't touch hyperopes, which I hope changes as well. I mean, it's just a question of skill and technology, and that intersection of practice will allow you to expand your treatment areas and to have the confidence to treat hyperopes as well. We've seen many, many hyperopes very happy as a result of their surgery. Now we come to presbyopic patients. Now, of course, we have 0% incidence among millennials, and around the age of 40, this is no news to you. I know I'm speaking to those who know a lot more about this than I do, but around the age of 40, then we start to get symptoms that that require us to wear these guys. So now we're in the presbyopes, and around the age of 50 is the red line at which time everybody is presbyopic. Everybody experiences these symptoms, okay? Of course, with a few outliers, but let's say statistically everybody experiences presbyopic symptoms by the time they reach 50 years of age. So baby boomers, every single one of them is presbyopic, yeah? And every single traditionalist is presbyopic. Now, I just want you to consider this surrounding the idea that who's got the need, and who's got the money, and who's got the numbers, okay? It's A, B, C. It's very simple. Those folks who have a little less need are the millennials. They have a little less money, and they have a little less numbers when you compare it to Generation Xers and baby boomers, okay? So we've got significant differences among the populations here. So I question, why are we all focusing entirely on offering laser eye surgery to millennials? I know why, because that's what the technology allows us to do. However, things are changing. Things have changed. I have been involved with laser eye surgery refractive practices who have been marketing laser blended vision for over a decade. And we've got loads and loads of happy patients who are singing the praises of this surgery. It's an opportunity that's just sitting there waiting to be taken. So yeah. Now let's have a look. This chart shows us graphically what I've been talking about. Essentially, millennials are indeed the largest generation, but when compared to baby boomers and Generation Xers, if you stack that green line on top of that yellow line, it almost doubles that orange line. And that pretty much applies to most of the main countries in Europe, of which we tend to look at most. When you look at the income, again, we have millennials with much less income. And this, I had a discussion at one of the events with a German surgeon who was telling me, look, our millennials have lots of money. Well, yeah, sure, the millennials that come into your practice have lots of money, but this does not describe the millennial generation as a whole. And we can't simply just grow businesses on the basis of those who already come to us. We have to look for more. And so, yeah, we have to be thinking about the other generations. Either that, or we have to reconsider how we price some of our options for our less financially endowed individuals. Baby boomers and Generation X are larger together, and baby boomers and Gen X have higher incomes. And that's the main point that I'm trying to make. And this applies pretty much across the board. So it's something that we have to be conscious of, and it's something that we have to change. But at this moment, we have to adapt, and we have to take advantage of these market conditions in order to grow our businesses and retain substantial and sustainable growing businesses. So let's talk about, we talked about income, let's talk about spend now, okay? Like a discretionary income, what do people spend their money on? Now, I'm just going to show you this chart here. The key areas we're going to look at is spending power as shown by discretionary income purchases like theater and cinema, travel abroad, dining out, and spending on new cars. Okay, so I'm just going to show you these two graphs now. Now, as you can see, for millennials, their spending power has declined mainly, and whereas baby boomers has increased over the same period of time. The millennials spend half as much on theater and cinema, whereas baby boomers spend 2 times as much. The millennials spend £922 less on foreign travel, whereas per person, than boomers, whereas boomers spend 1.3 billion more on foreign travel than they did in 1999. So they're just spending more and more and more. Dining out, millennials spend 18% less, whereas baby boomers spend 33% more. Millennials have an 80% drop in purchases of new cars, especially among the under 30s, whereas we only see an 8% drop in new purchases of cars among baby boomers. So even in areas where folks are struggling to sell product, we're still seeing baby boomers still buy many of those products, like new cars. So yeah, we've got not only a low amount of income among millennials, but a low discretionary income, therefore a smaller spending power. The biggest reasons for this are the fact that housing costs are through the roof among most Western society. Education is becoming more and more expensive. Both of these things incur debt, of which is getting greater and greater. And wages have not increased in comparison to prices. So this is a recipe for impending doom. Well, that's perhaps a bit overstated. But we're already seeing significant political upheaval as a result of the broad populations essentially, at least ideologically, defecting from the economic conditions that we're all now beginning to suffer. So food for thought. In terms of the marketplace size, we are seeing presbyopes grow. We have a whole bunch of new people coming into the presbyopic boat every single year. The median age for Europeans right now is 42. So this is the onset, typically, of presbyopic symptoms. And soon, 50% of Europeans will be presbyopic. You've all heard of the aging population. That is certainly the case in the developed world. And so we have to be conscious of the fact that we need to really invest not only in the technology to serve these folks, but also in the in communicating to these folks about the technology that is available to them. Speaking about the aging population, let's have a quick look at these perhaps familiar demographic charts, which show what I learned a while ago was termed the pig and the python. So if you can imagine this like if you turn it on its side, this is like a snake, and you got a pig rolling through that snake. Of course, it would have to be a python in order to swallow a pig whole. So what we see here is this pig basically going up the snake and eventually, I suppose, out the other end. I don't know. So we've got probably a bad analogy. European Union 2010, and we've got the traditionalists here. And then we've got the baby boomers there. So as you can see, there's quite a big range of traditionalists there, because all those folks were born prior to 1945. And then we've got the wider group of Generation Xers there, and Generation Y there. And so what are we going to look like in 2050? First of all, let's draw that presbyopic line there in terms of who becomes presbyopic. We have baby boomers at the very top of that snake. Generation X then, and Generation Y. So pretty much every Generation Y, well, at least 2/3 of them, are going to be presbyopic by 2050. Sorry guys, it's coming. Generation Z, which follows, are then going to become the new laser refractive surgery patient base for conventional LASIK. Okay, so presbyopes are motivated. We all know about these symptoms. These symptoms are not new. They're not going to be news to you by any means. But I just want to remind you of the slight psychological difference that takes place among presbyopes when compared to myopes and hyperopes and astigmatics. So eye strain and headaches after reading or doing close work. Yes, we know that happens. Difficulty reading small print, especially labels. My goodness, if I have a look at even with my own slight +1, +2s. +1.5s, it's hard to read pill bottles. I mean, you look at the back of a pill bottle, and the type is so small that I think I would need, typically what I do is I either go under a lamp, or I get my cell phone, my mobile phone lantern, and click it onto the pill bottle, and that's when I can see those letters. It's very, very difficult, and I'm reminded of it every single day. We also have fatigue from doing close-up work. We need brighter lighting when reading or doing close-up work. We need to hold reading material at arm's length. This is the I can read as far as this and this and this and this, and at which point I get to this point, then all of a sudden I can't read anymore. Overall problem seeing and focusing on close objects, yes, and squinting. And this is an interesting one. They want to stop the clock on aging. So I want you to think about this from a patient's perspective for a moment. This is what we do all day long, is think about things from patient perspectives, because that's what we do. We're marketers. So I want you to think about what the difference in one's experience with glasses is when you compare a 5-year-old who is prescribed glasses and then has to wear them pretty much for their entire lives. They have years and years and years of getting used to these glasses. These glasses become a part of their identity. They see themselves in pictures whenever they see them in glasses. Their habit is essentially putting their glasses on in the morning and taking their glasses off at night, and really keeping them on all day long. These people have had a lot of time, decades, to become accustomed to wearing glasses. Those that graduated to contact lenses because they didn't like the way glasses looked, typically, that's the main reason, for convenience as well, they have had years, decades, to get accustomed to sticking a piece of plastic in their eye and removing it at night. So the big difference here is that we are much more malleable. We're much more open to change when we're younger, and much less so when we're older. So when I say older, I mean older than being younger, like a 20-year-old. When we're 40, we are considerably more set in our ways. Some people liken it to, well, you stick a human in an oven, and you're baking them the whole time they're growing up, and eventually they come out fully baked, right? You take them out a little early, they're a bit half baked. But when they're fully baked, they're solid. That's it. It's difficult to change them, and that's one of the reasons why presbyopes are so motivated, because these are essentially new problems, right? But these are new problems that we're dealing with, and new problems tend to want to get solved. Whereas problems that we've lived with for years and years and years, decades in some cases, our whole lives in other cases, are problems that we have become accustomed to. They're problems that we have now begun to develop coping mechanisms that have now made these problems less of problems. In fact, in many cases, when we talk to laser refractive patients or prospective patients, we say, can you tell me a little bit about your problem? They say, oh, I don't have a problem. I just wear glasses and I want to get rid of them. I mean, it's amazing, but yet they're happy to spend thousands of pounds or euros and put their most precious biological possessions under the hands and in the past knives and certainly in every case lasers of surgeons and happily pay for that privilege. Yeah, these are problems, yeah, but still. Psychologically, humans are exceedingly adaptable, and they find many, many ways to deal with the problems they have. However, again, I'll restate, because it bears restating, when we have brand new problems, we are keen to get rid of them because they are new. And we haven't yet developed the coping mechanisms. We haven't yet acclimatized to these new problems. And one of the biggest problems is this one. And this is exactly what we feel like we're doing all the time. We're taking them off, we're putting them on, we're taking them off, we're putting them on, we're taking them off. That's another unique difference between what we experience wearing reading glasses versus what those who have worn glasses for their entire lives experience. We are always taking them off. and putting them on, because our visual needs are changing all the time from distance to near, and everything in between. And worst thing is that these guys have an amazing ability to find their way into lost places. There's a reason I have 4 pair. It's not because I'm luxurious. It's because I typically don't know where 2 of those pair are at any one time. So I consistently have to rebuy them. Fortunately, they're cheap, but it's a pain. So yeah, this is one of the biggest problems. We call it the on-off syndrome, and it's what most prospective laser eye surgery patients who are interested in presbyopic laser complain about. And certainly as well, those who are interested in refractive lens exchange are the same. So let's summarize the opportunity before we get into some tactical approaches about how to grasp it. So essentially, baby boomers and Generation Xers are a huge part of the population. When taken together, much bigger than millennials, in fact, close to double the size. Presbyopes are a growing market. We keep getting a new boatload of presbyopes into the bucket on a constant basis, and many more than are dying off. Baby boomers are highly motivated when they notice anything wrong. We are baby boomers are the generation that invented cosmetic surgery. I mean, talk about motivated. These people, the moment they see something that suggests that they're getting older than they feel, is the moment they want to fix it. And this has generated an enormous market in non-invasive, non-surgical cosmetics and creams. Certainly the health and fitness boom, which helps many people in my generation and the generation that came before me to stay looking as young and healthy as they possibly can. And also cosmetic surgery, which involves everything from lifting one's jaws to the brows and blepharoplasty, lids, you name it. And that's just the face. Nose jobs. I mean, we are part of a generation, baby boomers and Generation Xers, who are keen to look our best despite our advancing years. And the main reason for this is because when we're, for example, when I'm 46 years old, I don't feel 46 years old. I feel closer to 36 years old. They keep saying, the 40s are the new 30s. Well, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. I mean, and it's just not just because I feel fit and healthy, but also because the kinds of activities that I get involved in are not the kinds of things that my parents did when they were 46. I mean, not even close. The kinds of activities I engage in are the kinds of things that I've been doing right throughout my 30s and all through my 20s. So yeah, we're a motivated bunch, and baby boomers are very similar, and we want things to be as good as they possibly can be for as long as they possibly can be. So yeah, we'll spend the money that we have in order to make that happen. Baby boomers have more spending power than millennials, and that is where it all comes down. If there's one objection in laser refractive surgery that I can't overcome and find great difficulty in teaching anyone else to overcome, is price. Now, you can justify why you're more valuable than the lower priced option. You can show comparisons. You can demonstrate how much better your results are, how much greater your safety is, how much better customer service you offer. But there's one thing you can't do, and you can't basically create out of thin air the money for people who don't have it. Okay, you can't squeeze blood from a stone. And this is what the situation that we're all now beginning to embrace is. Let's look at millennials as the new generation that will save refractive surgery and bring it back to its glory days when the boomers elevated it to such heights. It's not going to happen. It just simply won't until the huge macroeconomic changes take place that are essentially the design of our politics. So these types of things take time. They take time to change. We hope they change. I am very much a believer in equality, and intergenerational equality is a hugely important issue for me as well. But I know I can't make it happen on my own. And for now, we need to adapt. we also need to give millennials a bit of a break, I think, in terms of offering them services and products that they too can afford. Why should we have all the fun, if you like? Okay, so we have to be conscious of that. Some people, when they hear this talk, they think, "Oh my goodness, what are you saying, Rod? Are you saying that I need to abandon the millennial market? I need to abandon regular LASIK in favor of these new presbyopic laser options, or perhaps refractive lens exchange?" Absolutely not. Nothing could be further from what my message is intended to be. What I'm saying to you is that no, you don't have to abandon what you're doing. Instead, do both. Offer both markets something they can adopt. Grow your business by expanding your offerings to offer something that millennials tremendously can benefit from, and also something that presbyopes, Generation Xers and baby boomers, can also benefit from. Laser eye surgery is one of the most successful procedures, elective surgical procedures, ever in history. And I'm very happy to be a part of that. And I would be the last person to say to anyone that they need to abandon LASIK as an option for people, because it is an excellent product with tremendous patient satisfaction and exceedingly low complication rates. In fact, the myths and misconceptions far outpace the concerns that we should have when it comes to actually looking at the statistics of what can go wrong. So absolutely not. I am not saying to abandon LASIK. I am saying embrace it. Embrace that millennial population. Treat them the way they ought to be treated, the way they need to be treated, the way they want to be treated, but also look at expanding your offerings by offering both conventional LASIK and also presbyopic LASIK when that becomes available for you. Guess what? The technology has been around for over a decade. It's working exceedingly well. Here in the UK, it is a success story. In the rest of Europe, it's just beginning to take off. I'm sure it's going to be huge. In the US, when the FDA approves it, the US, by the way, most people who are listening to this presentation know this, but the US is traditionally the slowest group to adopt new technologies, and there's lots of reasons for that. It has very little to do with the experimental nature of the technology, but more about the politics of keeping the status quo. Offer both when you can. Evidence suggests as well that presbyopic treatment does not cannibalize LASIK treatment. So we've seen practices that increase their markets, increase their patient base, increase their patient volume by offering these two different options, as opposed to the thought that I get communicated to me by some surgeons is, oh, well, if I now offer Presbeyond, all of a sudden nobody will want Smile. No. That's not even remotely the case. I mean, does somebody come in and go, oh, you have beer and wine. I'm a beer lover, but now I'm just going to have wine instead, so therefore I'll never buy beer again. It doesn't work that way. There's different products for different occasions. There's different services for different needs. There's different medical procedures for different medical needs. So this is what we're talking about here, about expanding the market, not contracting it, and certainly not cannibalizing it from one to the other. And we need different marketing approaches. For millennials, we need different marketing approaches for Generation Xers, and we need different marketing approaches for baby boomers. And fortunately for you, we have studied these groups at great length, in great depth, to understand what appeals to them the most. I mean, right now we're getting loads and loads of books and talks and thinking around millennials, and that's great. This is super important and super valuable. But we need to also think about how not to just think about who we're talking to, but also how we integrate all of that into a practice. How can you serve all of these groups in the same approach? It's not going to be as effective as having a different approach for every group. So, by adding presbyopic LASIK, it more than doubles your market. We have, of course, the millennials on this age range, whom LASIK is ideal for. We then have the Generation X in this range. And then we have the baby boomers in this range, of whom presbyopic LASIK is very useful. And Generation X is right now currently sitting in about the middle. We also have the traditionalists and that range, of whom are a smaller population that is really the bread and butter of those ophthalmologists who are working on age-related conditions. Now, these circles that I put up here are in fact sized to represent the relative sizes of the populations of these generations in Europe. So they're not just haphazardly sized that way. They in fact represent the different populations. Now, what do we have to do? Because we're going to go back to this these circles in a moment. We have to move to segmentation. We have to go from homogeneous, broadcast-oriented marketing to heterogeneous, narrowcast-oriented marketing. And what does that mean? Well, we have to change the way we communicate in terms of the marketing channels we use. We have to change the messages that we use to appeal to people. We have to change the communication styles for these different generations. We have to change the way that we interact with these patients and respond to what they expect for the different generations. We have to change the way we price for the different generations as well, to respect the fact that there's a tremendous amount of economic inequality among the generations and between the generations. So yeah, we need to go from the homogeneous monolithic way of thinking in terms of I've got one product and I've got one approach to market that product, to a more segmented approach where we're talking about different markets and speaking to them in different ways for multiple products. Okay, so it's a change for many laser refractive surgeons to get used to. Let's first talk about marketing channels. So we're going from analog, outbound, and interrupt, which was the flavor of marketing in the past, to digital, inbound, and interact. So the notion of going from interruptive marketing, meaning interrupting one during dinner, for example, from a telemarketer, to go into interactive marketing, taking the lead from people who are interested in the marketing and then engaging with them. We're talking from analog, which is the opposite of digital, so going from more print-based and radio-based and television-based advertising to more on-demand digital advertising that is in the form of many websites and SMS and email and newsletters and videos and all that. We're going from outbound to inbound, meaning going out and trying to penetrate markets with our messages, as opposed to inbound, where we have our markets come to us because they love our content and therefore want to engage with our marketing. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about traditionalists first. In terms of, now I've moved them on the other side of the chart here. They're on the analog and outbound and interrupt side. What I mean by that is that's the kind of marketing they're used to. These folks are the ones who were first exposed to advertising from the very beginning. Advertising hasn't been around for as long as agriculture has been around. We're talking about just a very short period of time relative to how long we've been around. And traditionalists were the first to experience advertising on a mass scale. There was no real mass media in the 1900s. Yeah, sure, there were newspapers and things like that, but I mean, many people couldn't even read way back then compared to what the kind of ubiquitous reading levels that we have now. And then we have baby boomers who are a little bit more on the side of getting away from the analog, getting away from the outbound. Of course, they grew up here because marketing hadn't changed for a very long time, and in fact, it didn't really change until the great man of advertising, David Ogilvy, first started promoting the idea that, hey, we need to kind of look at advertising slightly differently. Things are changing. And this is where we get the Mad Men era, where we have a different approach to advertising. We start looking at it as a proper profession, as opposed to just something that businesses do in order to sell products. And the baby boomers have been slowly moving along the side here towards the digital, towards the inbound, towards the interactive. Almost every baby boomer now has an email address. Many of them are holding their mobile phones just as much as Generation Xers and Millennials are. They interact with their families using text, SMS. They're on WhatsApp. they've got Facebook profiles. One of the main reasons why millennials have left Facebook in droves is because their parents are on there. So baby boomers are certainly adopting this and taking hold of the new media much more than traditionalists ever will. And then we have Generation X, who grew up in the shadow of the baby boomers, and then also has drifted in the direction of digital inbound and interact. So these folks have really, many of these folks are the ones who are starting the companies that are, in fact, the new media companies that have been most successful over the last 10 to 15 years. And then now we have millennials, and millennials are really pushing the edge of the envelope now on the digital inbound and interact scale. They're the ones who are getting into social media platforms that most of us haven't even heard of because they're so niche. I mean, in general, I could have also put, single channel and fragmentation on the other side. We're going through it from a quite unified approach in terms of media. Like, for example, how many channels did traditionalists enjoy on their television sets? None before 1945. However, they did have radio, and they had typically state radio. Baby boomers, they enjoyed maybe a couple, 3, 4, 5 in some cases. Very few radio channels that they had an option to listen to. Generation X, this is when we first got recordable media. First started with tapes, like certainly audio tapes and VCRs and VHS. Betamax, and then eventually got into more of the digital components, where we started now getting into cable and satellite, and then further moving forward, now we have digital TV, internet TV, and now it's YouTube. So this is an example of how it used to be one channel, and this has diversified now and fragmented into literally millions of channels that people can get on board and watch. I have my own YouTube channel. This is how fragmented these things are. You're watching this, and this video is actually on our YouTube channel. Media is everywhere, and media belongs to everyone. It's an interactive approach. No longer are we just sitting here like an audience. We are participants in the media. This chart can be a little bit overwhelming, but it's one of the most interesting charts that people respond to in my speaking. Is they look at this and they go, oh wow, okay, finally somebody has plotted the marketing tactics with respect to how the generations adopt them. And I want to say, I'm not going to go through each one of these. It's way too much to get through. But as you can see, if you're doing the kinds of things that are on the side of the traditionalists, and if your market are not traditionalists, you got to stop doing those things. Maybe not immediately. Maybe you got to wean yourself off and replace those lead sources with other lead sources that are more productive. But these things are dying. Newspapers, TV, radio. People don't care about these things anymore. These things are going away. The average cable news viewer is somewhere around 72 years old. Talk about traditionalists, right? We're seeing these folks hang on to that media, and they'll be the last folks who watch television of that nature. So all the stuff that you see today, all the big news channels, they're all losing popularity. They're all losing ground. ESPN is losing ground. We're seeing an amazing reduction in the popularity and the views and the viewers, unique viewers, among all of these old world channels. And so is the advertising going to go away on that. Maybe there'll be some deals to be had. There should be. The advertising that's being offered on that media is way overpriced, in my opinion. Hopefully it'll get cheaper and cheaper in price to reflect its true value. Well, on the other hand, if you're looking at baby boomers, then you got to be doing more of the things that we have over the baby boomers group, things like, for example, as well with millennials, we got to be doing things like SEO, SEM, social media marketing, SMS marketing, podcasts. These are not the types of things, the new and shiny things that people talk about that you want to be doing if you're mainly focusing on baby boomers, right? So this is a good way of kind of understanding where do the things that I have an interest in intersect, the things meaning the markets, Where do they intersect with the types of things that I think drive lead volume? So we have to decide, okay, am I using the right channels that appeal to the right target market? And you have to get rid of the ones that don't appeal. Either don't adopt the ones that are too new, and get rid of the ones that are too old. Again, depending on your target market mix. If you're only working on millennials, why are you doing anything on the traditionalist side? It's amazing to me. See, the thing is that many of the owners and managers of laser refractive practices are baby boomers and traditionalists. Yet they're marketing to a group they know nothing about. Okay, so and they don't know the types of things that millennials enjoy. So they're missing out on major opportunities to attract them. Of course, there's a lot of conversation going on about this very subject in trying to get these traditionalists and baby boomer owners and managers to start looking at millennials as the marketplace and start changing the approaches that they take with them. But we also got to think about the other ways too, is that baby boomers and Generation Xers are changing too. These folks aren't just staying where they are, they're moving with the times and they're starting to adopt a lot of the same things that millennials are. Nowhere near at the same pace, nowhere near as fragmented, but certainly they are following in the footsteps of the younger in this case. Marketing messages, let's talk about how those differ. So with traditionalists, we're talking about a message that it's all about me. And the me in this case is the company or the provider of the service. So the kinds of advertisements that you would see in the past are the kinds of advertisements that are focused entirely on the company. It's like, look at our brand of soap. It's the best. It's the cleanest, it's the cheapest, whatever. It's used by, all the, by the presidents. This is the approach that has been communicated to traditionalists for decades now. It's all about me. It's all about me. But however, now things changed when David Ogilvy started looking at, and this again was in the 60s, when all we had was print and radio and TV. David Ogilvy looked at what was being offered in the advertising space and thought, wait a minute. These headlines can't be all about us. They got to be about our customers. They got to be about the benefits that we're offering people. So, we have to answer the question with them. What's in it for me? and that's where advertising became all about you. And that's why you is one of the most favorite words in ad copy, because the more we are talking to individuals about what's important to them, the better off we'll have a chance of resonating with them. Now, one would imagine, well, if it goes from all about me and then all goes to all about you, then that's the extent of that continuum. However, you would be wrong, because now we're going to it's all about us. Now, it's interesting because millennials have had a pretty bad rap, actually. Many people consider them lazy, because they don't have jobs. Oh, yeah, it's not exactly easy to get employment as a millennial these days. They have young people always have the highest unemployment rates across all generations. But not only that, it's getting harder and harder to get anything of substance in terms of a long-term job, a long-term career job that the kinds of baby boomers are used to. Now, no longer are folks spending 20, 30 years in the same job. It just isn't possible anymore. Things are changing way too fast. Information is changing constantly. Knowledge is changing constantly. And pretty soon we're all going to be replaced by robots. I mean, just think about what we'll do then. So with millennials, it's all about us. And what they want is they want to know about your company. Yeah, that's important. They want to know that you help them achieve what they want to achieve with regards to benefits of your product. They believe that's important too. But additionally, not necessarily more important, but additionally, they want to know that you care about the world. They want to know that you are willing to stick your neck out and take, for example, some of your profits and donate them to causes they care about. They care about things like the environment. They care about things like economic equality. They care about things like education. They care about helping those in need abroad, foreign aid. They care about human rights for everybody, expanding that circle of equality and liberty for all. They care about women's rights, the rights of minorities. These are the kinds of things they care about, and they want you to care about those things too, because it's more personal now. The relationships have gone from transactional to transformational. And what we're talking about here are millennials who really care about seeing you as a good corporate citizen. They don't want to put money into you if you aren't putting some of that money elsewhere and showing that it's not all about you. They're not really interested in making you rich. That's not something they care about too much. So what did we have before? Is feature-focused advertising, just in summary. We had benefit-focused advertising then after that, especially appeals to baby boomers and Generation Xers. And now we have socially conscious communication. And again, it's not just advertising. Now it's two-way. Now these are conversations, right? It's not all about you. It's you talking to me, and it's about us talking to each other. And that's the millennial mindset. Communication styles. Well, let's talk a little bit about how that differs. And it does. In the past, we had a lot more formality in our communication, both written and orally. We typically wouldn't, we wouldn't have a video, for example, of the type that I'm preparing right now, unless it was studio produced, unless it cost lots and lots of money and loads of money on editing. Chances are I'm gonna edit this myself. On top of that, I'd be dressed in a suit. I'd be speaking from a prepared speech. It's a completely different approach to how we talk today. Now it's very much off the cuff. It's very much what's on our minds. It's very much of the moment. And it's very much given in an informal tone. And this is how millennials want to be spoken to. Baby boomers and Generation Xers, not so much. They're still on the cusp. However, there's a big difference between traditionalists and millennials. It's massive in terms of how they like to be spoken to. So the language differences are clear. In the past, especially doctors used to use the first and third person, I and he, and it was often a he because there weren't very many women doctors at all. Then we moved to the second person, and you might still be surprised that ophthalmology just hasn't moved on as quickly as other professions, and I don't mean in medicine. Medicine in general is quite slow to move forward in terms of communication styles. I'd say ophthalmology is one of the more advanced ones in medicine, but medicine as a whole is quite slow. Some would say glacial. I would say slow. But for example, even now, only months ago, I spoke to one of our clients who said to us, and I think I wrote about this in a blog post recently. The client said, thank you very much for my website, but why is my picture not on the front cover? Why is my name and everything I offer not on the front page? And I said to them, well, look, because it's not all about you. These folks want to know what can be done for them. And the person they most care about is not you, unfortunately. The person they most care about is themselves. And so what they're most interested in is, do they understand my problem? Do they have an easy and quick way of helping me fix it, or at least getting into the process of helping me fix it? And do I have a general feeling that I can afford it? And then lastly, it's, do I want you to do it? So, and do I want to do it now? So it's changed. We're not just looking at a doctor and saying, is this the right person? De facto, because his name begins with the initials DR, he's the best person for the job. No, now what we're talking about is, this is a competitive marketplace. Do you get me? Do you understand me? And millennials, again, do you understand us? Do you understand how we can all work together, millennial and you, to solve my problems together? So here we're using the we. Again, this is not hard and fast. Not every single sentence is going to have a we instead of a you. But I want you to consider taking that tone of voice, that sort of like, we're in this together. We're on the same side of the table. In the second person phase, the Generation X, we didn't have a table at all because we wanted openness and wanted familiarity between us. In the traditionalists, we had a table dividing us. You see what I mean? So it's a real difference in terms of how we communicate and the style that we take. The traditionalists are very much more into long-form copy, and what I mean by that is long written pages. So for example, when we design a website for traditionalists, We won't have them hopping from link to link to link and lots of pages. What we'll do is instead we'll write everything they need to know in one document, yeah, about, for example, a particular condition or a particular treatment, one long document on the web. Because what are they going to do? Well, they're probably going to print it out and read it offline. So how are they going to be able to do that if they're jumping from link to link, getting lost? And again, it's not because they're stupid. Absolutely not. It's more about the fact that they're just not used to seeing information in a three-dimensional space in the same way that millennials are. Millennials are happy to go from link to link to link, seeing a PDF, watching a video, looking at your Twitter profile, then going back over to YouTube to see one of your videos that you show on Twitter, then checking out your Facebook, and then going back to your website, getting an email, communicating to you by SMS. They're hopping around, right? It's a completely different story. Generation X and baby boomers, they're used to getting their messaging in 30 to 60 second spots and standard advertising sizes. So that's in fact what you get a lot in websites and videos on YouTube, and we're slowly getting away from that. Does it make any sense for me to provide you with an hour video? Those of you who will be interested are very much going to be interested. This is my version of long form copy, but as well, when I blend it in to a video, then I get the advantage of communicating to Generation Xers and baby boomers in the way they like. If I was speaking to millennials, I would probably want to break down what I'm talking about in tweetable parts, bullet points. I'd use a lot more evidence-based evidence-based information. I'd cite my sources. I would also display what I do in multimedia as well, not just video, not just text, but also in diagrams and in infographics and quizzes and things like that. Learning and participative, interactive tools. This is how I'd communicate to millennials. Patient interactions are also changing, and when I talk about this, I mean on the phone and also in person. With traditionalists, what we have here are single-channel, didactic, clinically focused patient interactions. So it's all coming from the doctor. It's all very much, I tell you what you're going to do, patient. It's clinically focused. We don't talk about emotions. We talk about the data. We talk about the information. We talk about the condition, mainly the condition and mainly the treatment. And then we're moving towards multi-channel, like I said, coming in all sorts of different approaches. So we might have a conversation on the phone, then we'll also have a conversation by Skype, we'll also have a conversation in person, we'll also text each other. Autodidactic and interactive, so we're coming in with a lot of patients who have a lot more information. The conversation is much more question and answer between us. They will probably ask us questions as opposed to us asking them all the questions. And the tone of the conversation is much more emotionally focused. So what we're talking about here is talking about emotions and talking about why they want to have this done and how this feels and what kind of impact this is going to have on their lives. Now, these aren't just millennials. These are Generation Xers and baby boomers. Remember, the green and the yellow, the baby boomers and the Generation X, are all moving down these continuums as well. It's only the traditionalists who tend to remain in the same place, again, because they've lived their entire lives in that place, and many of them, in fact, resist change, as opposed to baby boomers and Generation X, by varying degrees, adopt change more easily. Millennials are happy to just, they know nothing but change. So that's their lives. I mean, it would be no doubt hopelessly boring if things stopped changing. Where we had house calls before, we have phone calls now predominantly, and we're going to have Skype calls in the future. We had the doctor doing all the talking in the didactic single-channel approach. And over time, the doctor did 80% of the talking. I still, pretty much before I speak to the people that I train with, because I train a lot of doctors in how to handle first appointments, and that's the critical sales component of the process for elective surgery. They're doing 80% of the talking, and that doesn't work. It doesn't work for millennials, absolutely not, and it also doesn't work for Generation X and baby boomers. So now what we're going to is getting to a point where we're having the patient doing 80% of the talking. And this is hard because when they talk, they also ask questions, and then we have to answer those questions, and it lengthens these conversations into much perhaps longer interactions than we're used to. And what do we do with all that time? What about all the other time that we need to actually do work? It can be challenging. We're talking about a low information patient in the past. Again, it doesn't mean they were ignorant. They just simply didn't have the means to educate themselves. The medicine was an area that was like all information was fenced around the elite. So only those with the credentials, the right credentials, and the right experience and the right training would know anything about these particular subject areas. And that slowly these fences have expanded, and they've filtered. And over time, what we're seeing is sometimes not for great effect. We're seeing people become more responsible for their own education and walking into doctors' practices armed with loads and reams of information about their condition and about their options. So what we're dealing with here is the high information patient. And I would argue that millennials are no doubt the most high information patients you're ever going to face. They're the most educated patient. They no doubt have had longer education than anyone else. Their education has been of the highest quality, higher quality than anyone else, and more specific and niche than anyone else. And not only that, but they also have something that's very, very useful for autodidacts, which is the internet. And pretty much anything that's worth knowing, and many things that are not, are available on the internet for free for anyone who has the ability to search for it, of which millennials are pros. So yeah, we're talking about a very high information patient, but also Generation Xers are not far behind at all. Generation Xers are very, very good at research. They grew up, especially in their senior years, educationally, with internet research, so they know it well, and they're going to walk in, doing what they have to do. Baby boomers are also becoming very, very good at research as well on the internet. They grew up with libraries. They grew up with consuming information just as much as everyone else. Perhaps not as much and not as differentiated, but certainly high volume. Where traditionalists didn't do that so much. In the past, we had the husband deciding how things were going to go, whether or not somebody was going to have treatment for anything. And then we had the wife deciding. So as things changed, the decision-making authority went more to the wife because, well, I'm not even going to say why, because perhaps I can only speculate that women tend to have more patience for health information, more of an interest, and men tend to have a little less interest in their own personal health. That's changing, but the kind of change we're seeing that is in more millennial-focused Generation Xers, and also certainly millennials, of whom the genders as well are now becoming less rigid and more fluid. And male millennials are becoming more in touch with their feminine side than ever before, while female millennials are becoming more in touch with their masculine sides than ever before. So, but in this case now, the millennials, the family decides. So they bring in whoever is going to be part of the conversation, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, they'll bring them into the conversation. So we have many millennials who will bring in people to the consultations, to first appointments, and make these decisions together. So we have many decision makers, many influencers. It's much more complex. Pricing approaches. What does this look like? Well, we used to have a fair and a more cash-based society when it came to the people who could afford things, especially in the Western world. Strangely, isn't it? Considering we're supposed to have progress. And then we moved towards a premium and financed society. So things were being sold at much, much higher luxury prices, and when we couldn't afford them with cash, we simply put them on credit. And now we've gone to a budget and debit society with millennials. So it's what can I do on a slim budget? Because remember, my discretionary income is tiny with comparison to Generation X and baby boomers. And can I, and they also don't have a lot of credit available, so they have to go on debit. Yeah. So what does this look like? Well, the traditionalists are anti-credit. They're the folks who won't take a loan, who won't take up any financing. If they have the cash, they'll buy it. If they don't, they won't. What's interesting is that many of these folks do have the cash. Right? They have liquid. Therefore, they're considerably more able to make these decisions when they need to. Premium and Generation X and baby boomers are pro credit. They're all about like, bring it on, bring on the credit cards and bring on the debt, and I'll pay it off later. They're the most credit-oriented generation in history. Millennials, unfortunately, I call them no credit. And what that means, essentially, is they have very little access to credit in comparison to the generations that preceded them. They not only have less income, which is a factor in getting credit, they have more current debt load, which is a factor in, also a negative factor in getting credit as well. And they they also have many other things that they might otherwise already have payments going towards. So yeah, they also have fewer assets, and assets are typically a factor when getting credit. Yeah, you have to have considerably more of an asset base in order to get any collateral-based credit. So yeah, these are the challenges that are facing millennials, and so we're going to have to think about how this works. I mean, traditionally speaking, only about 25% of patients used financing, whether it was interest-bearing or interest-free credit, to finance their procedures anyway. But we're also looking at millennials perhaps not having access to that kind of financing. The other thing too about millennials too is that they move around a lot more. So you might have people, coming to the UK who have only been here for 6 months, whereas Generation Xers might have been a bit more established. The challenge is that somebody with only 6 months of longevity in a country has much lower access to credit than somebody with many more years. So again, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of migration, and that's coupled with all these other challenges in getting credit. So we're going to see, this tough credit environment is not going to get easier for millennials. It's in fact probably only going to get harder. In the past, the husband pays. So they were the primary breadwinner. In fact, they were the only breadwinner for many traditionalists. And then as double income households became the norm, then the couple paid. So we could draw money from the husband's income and we could draw money from the wife's income, even if only one of them needed an elective treatment. And now the patient pays. So what do I mean by that? Well, now often millennials are not coupled. They, in fact, have the lowest rates of marriage than any generation that preceded it. And they're living often with their parents because they just simply can't afford to live alone. So yeah, now it's the patient pays. And yes, absolutely, I will grant that in some cases, especially if millennials have wealthy baby boomer parents, they will get baby boomers to help them either finance their elective procedures like laser eye surgery, or simply pay for them outright. However, I will suggest to you that when we're hoping that someone else pays for our patients' treatment, remember, only 25% of folks elect for financing. So I would suggest that the number that can get financing from their parents or just get it paid for by their parents might even be less. So it's not exactly a good solid foundation on which to base your pricing practices. Yeah, so that's it. There's quite a lot there. I just want to complete this presentation with some take-home messages, essentially a summary of what I've said. The presbyopic market is much too large and too wealthy for laser refractive surgeons to ignore. The key thing here is we've been waiting a long time for the technology to be available. We now have it. Some of us are in the US especially are still waiting for that technology to become approved. That is imminent. So now is the time to understand how to change your practice to adopt this segmented approach, to recognize that number two, laser eye surgery markets differ from each other, and we need to take a segmented marketing approach to attract these very different patients. So yeah, that's the essence of what I'm trying to communicate, and I hope that has been useful. I'm sure it's been informative. I want to thank you for your attention over the last hour in what I hope has been a very enriching talk, and I encourage you as well to ask me any questions you like at the bottom in the comments or in social media. And please keep in touch. And again, thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.